I'd like to introduce the Director of Content Production Services at Elsevier. With over 15 years of experience in the publishing industry, she develops and builds strategic visions to leverage new and existing technical solutions and established work approaches. She also enforces online terms of service and acceptable usage policy for the vast library of Elsevier online products. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Sari Francis.
Thanks for having me here today. There's a lot of new things that are happening. This is my first time at lockdown, my first time in Wisconsin, and my very first time speaking on behalf of Elsevier. So for those of you who don't know, Elsevier is we're a commercial publisher. We have about 16 million documents on our platform called Science Direct, and our customers are academic, corporate, and government institutions worldwide. But prior to that, I worked for IEEE, which is a non-for-profit organization, also an STM publisher. So forgive me if I start talking about both of them simultaneously, because it's a bad habit that I've already formed in my first couple of weeks at Elsevier. So, but before I begin, I'd like to ask a couple of questions. So how many of you, raise your hands, have had a credit card compromised? Pretty much a lot of people, right? So how long did that take to resolve itself? So you probably got an email from your credit card vendor, or you noticed some inappropriate charges on your credit card, something happened that made you trigger that event to then take necessary action and have that resolved. And it probably took maybe a couple of minutes. Maybe you made a phone call to customer service, let them know what's happening. You saw some transactions that you weren't aware of, or you got an email alert or a text message, and problem solved. But that's not what we're talking about here today. We're talking stolen credit cards are not stolen content. We're here to discuss fixing a problem that doesn't have a solution currently. And so I'm talking to you today about Sci-Hub, which is an illegal website that's undermining the foundation of scientific information and not to make papers freely available. It's basically a cyber attack on science. Sci-Hub and other digital piracy threats are not just a publisher problem or an academic community problem. It's a universal problem that's affecting many innocent victims with data security, loss of intellectual property, etc. And even I just saw recently in the news that British Airways was fined $230 million for failing to protect customer data from a breach that happened in September of 2018. So this is real, this is happening all over. And so today I'm going to discuss what the impact is and the efforts being made to mitigate this. So, Sci-Hub. It's an illegal website, again, that was created back in 2011 by a neuroscience scientist named Alexandra Elbakyan. And she's also been known as the Robin Hood of science. And for those of you who are maybe right now looking on your smartphones, don't go to that website, just forewarning you. There are some attempts, if you do attempt to access the site, I do recommend that you go through Tor or some other various means. Thank you. Since we don't know what information they're collecting about you or the activity that you're doing or where you came from before. It's an illegal website, and even though the face of it is this 30-year-old neuroscientist who really wants to make scientific, medical, and technical and medical information available for free, we don't know that she is the only person running this operation. And not only that, but how Sci-Hub gets access to publisher content is through nefarious means. So they acquire stolen user credentials. We're not sure how or why, but some of it, thank you. Some of it could be due to phishing attacks or other means. And so she even states in I forget which Science magazine, that she doesn't know how she acquires this information. So there's rumors that are spreading around about how and how they actually get acquired, those credentials. So this is a data that we received when I was at IEEE from one of our universities. And this was after I alerted them that there was Sci-Hub activity happening on their servers and that they needed to take action. And they routed the information that I provided them with the data logs and information, the date, timestamps, and everything, routed back to this one user account. And that account was accessing over 48,000, accessing over 360 sites with over 48,000 requests. And even though the requests are a lot, and it's all through all these different, and there's major publishers, there's IEEE up on the top left corner, I'm sure you can't really see, but there's Wiley, Elsevier, Taylor and Francis, all those electronic resources. And routing back to that end user is completely unaware that this is happening. And so when we alerted them of this infraction, and we do this on a daily basis, some of them don't even know what's happening. I've gotten emails from students saying, I'm so sorry that this happened. I don't even know who IEEE is. So this is one way that Sci-Hub is accessing content and building their library, and I'll talk more a little bit about that. But then there's also the end users who want to access the content, and they're purposely going to Sci-Hub and downloading content. So there's the innocent victims and then the people that are actually downloading content because it's so easy. It really, that's the beauty of it. There's no usernames and passwords. You don't have to authenticate. You could just, that's another issue. Google it and then go to the website and type in the DOI or the URL. There's even plugins out there. And then freely, just within seconds, you get the paper, pops up on your screen. So this is, and this is all public, I just want to preface this is all public information that I'm able to share with you today. I've given several talks about the IEEE's data. So this was data that I had been tracking from October of 2017 to August of 2018 to see how much content is being stolen. And this is with the protection measures that we had in place. And the reason why there was such a spike in February and May of 2018 is we had some issues with blocking and suspending infected IP addresses, and therefore the amount of content that was being stolen was completely significantly a lot more than what it had regularly been over this period of time. But what you can see is from the bars that the amount of customers that are being compromised kind of also goes in waves, and it's really hard to detect what kind of pattern is happening, but also to note that the amount of customers is not unique, so there are many times where we had to contact the same university over and over again that this activity had been occurring. And when that does happen with these repeated offenses, it's always with different usernames and passwords. It's not the same user account that's being compromised. So I just wanted to point that out. So how does Sci-Hub steal content? Well, as I mentioned, that they get access through phishing attacks or some ways that they get access to user credentials. How many years have we been tracking it? 3 or 4 years that we've been tracking Sci-Hub activity. We've had 2 instances where schools have alerted us that there is that connection between a phishing attack and the Sci-Hub attack. And it's really hard to pinpoint that because phishing and when Sci-Hub attacks can be 2 totally separate instances. So that's really hard to detect that. So we've had 2 universities that have been able to provide us with that data. And so, as I mentioned, they illegally access through the electronic resources and then get access to publisher content. And so what's also important to note here is that when they have access to these stolen user credentials, we don't know what else they're trying to acquire. So as I mentioned, there's this one woman behind it, but where is she getting these stolen user credentials, and what else are they accessing besides publisher content? So who's responsible for protecting content and personal data? Well, it starts with, obviously, the end user adopting stronger passwords. I think we're all victims of having our kids' names or birthdays or dogs' names or something like that as a password, because it's easy to memorize, it's easy to just type in, and you know it off the top of your head, some variation of what that is. So, and I've also seen the reuse of the same passwords for different platforms. That's another big no-no, and I'm sure you guys are very familiar with that as well. But it's also having the institutions help those students and staff understand that this is the vulnerabilities and that you need to adopt these stronger passwords. And what we've done in the publishing community is we've partnered with universities to educate and inform what's been happening as far as alerting them of these infractions, but also speaking at other conferences. So mostly our main contacts when it comes to the online subscriptions to content are through the library. So we've been speaking at various librarian conferences throughout the last several years. And I think it's also important for the end users to understand to comply with university policies. I think for some libraries, I understand that there's a page before you even log in of the terms and conditions of accessing electronic resources. That's really amazing things that universities are doing. But also it's important that these institutions and universities respond to publishers when we see this activity. And I know that it's a long and arduous process, it can be. I understand from speaking with several universities that they don't have the resources, or the smaller universities may not even have their own library IT. I think it's GW has their library has their own IT department. So whenever we communicate to them about these infractions, they go right to their library IT department, and then it's taken care of, and they get their access turned back on. And I think that's really what the librarians don't want, to have their access suspended. And so we're trying to work with them to also communicate with IT and IT security to mitigate this issue. And we've also, I forgot to mention, we also have been driving some cross-publisher protection, so I'll talk a little bit more about some of the efforts that have been made. We have a Sci-Hub executive steering group that's made of 15 different publishers. I'll talk a little bit about that later. But I think also with the end users, going back to the end users, sharing credentials. I've heard students, I know students share their passwords with their parents, so the parents know what they're doing and things like that, and that's all well and good. It's just, you just want to be very careful and cautious of who you share your credentials with. I've also, when I went and I attended the EDUCAUSE Security Professional Conference 2 months ago in Chicago, and one of the sessions that I attended, one of the speakers asked if everybody, raise your hand if you have MFA, and a lot of people in the room raised their hand, and I was pleasantly surprised at that, because I think having that implemented helps a great deal in this case. So I think with also detecting and blocking Sci-Hub access, we're, as I mentioned, we're constantly alerting customers of these infractions. So it's really important that we continuously have those conversations. So how does it actually work? I thought maybe showing a visual piece of how an end user actually goes to Sci-Hub and what happens would be very helpful here. So the end user of Sci-Hub, they want to ask for an article. They go to the website. What Sci-Hub does is go and check into their repository called LibGen. And that's where they're storing all the 65 to 70 million articles that they currently have. And if they have it, it immediately goes back to the end user and done. If they don't have it, it gets routed through the compromised institutional proxy, then goes through the firewalls and the SEM, and then a PDF is then delivered into LibGen repository, and then another copy then goes to the end user. So when we see the activity as publishers, it's going under the thresholds. It's not excessive downloading. Even though I showed you that other slide that had 48,000 requests, the requests don't equal downloads. So the amount is not tripping up publisher thresholds that we have, and every publisher is different. So, but it's the way that they're actually, when a user is requesting it, it's going through 20 to 30 different proxies all at the same time to find out which publisher platform and which proxy can I use to get this article. And it happens within seconds. So what's here interesting on this map, Alexandra decided to, she's a little bit of a bragger about this whole situation. And she tweeted out her usage statistics, sorry, tongue twister there, from 2017. So what we've done at both IEEE and Elsevier was compile that data to see where in the world are users accessing Sci-Hub. And so I did have a nice little interactive heat map, but I wasn't sure about the technical, things going on here. So if anybody is interested to learn more about this, I can forward that to you. But what we've noticed is that everything that's in a circle are the number of locations. So you might not be able to see it from where you're sitting. And the ones in red are obviously the highest amount. And then the ones that are like that kind of like teardrop are the number of locations. So it's pretty much obviously worldwide people are using Sci-Hub. But we've noticed that when we're looking at managing and tracking the activity, it's coming from US, Australia, and the UK. So, and that's kind of what's depicted here as well, but there's also we've seen some activities in India as well, so that was kind of new to us when we actually first got this information. So the challenges on mitigating Sci-Hub, well, as I mentioned, it's so easy to use it, and what we've found also is that many students and staff use it even though they already have their library subscribes to the publisher content. It's just, again, that easy to use. There's plugins. You just right-click on the plugin, and it comes up on your screen. And then the compromised user credentials, also working with Easy Proxy. We noticed that, I want to say probably close to 100% of the compromised institutions that we've found use Easy Proxy. Does everybody know what Easy Proxy is or have used in their institution? Okay, not. I'm seeing some nodded heads, some yes. And it's a proxy server that allows institutions to access publisher content. And so that's it. It's obviously his name is Easy Proxy for a reason, but we're working with OCLC, who owns and manages Easy Proxy, to find a better way to solve this problem. The ISPs worldwide allow access to this illegal website. So we're working within our Sci-Hub executive steering group to see what things that we can do there. And also the domain registry operators, Sci-Hub continuously, it's like playing whack-a-mole. So they're at I've seen them at .org, .se, .tw. There was a .love out there. So they're constantly changing their domains. But I think there's only 2 right now that are currently active. And as I mentioned that, Alexandra is supposedly the face of Sci-Hub, and she continues to be so, but is that really true? So we're looking to see how we can gather more information, and it's been really helpful, been talking to the universities for the last several years to find out more of this information, because as publishers, we can't see where the originating IP address is. So it's important then, and I'll talk a little bit more about what the information that we've been gathering from these discussions. So as I mentioned, we started contacting and alerting customers, and that's not just IEEE and Elsevier, but some other publishers as well, about these infractions. And so we've been requesting, as I said, that kind of data. So customers have been actually giving us lists of originating IPs, also the slide that I showed you in the beginning with all the list of publishers and the requests. So all of that data we've been collecting, and we're being able to push that back out to the community for free in a secure way that I'll get to talk to you about a little bit more. We've also partnered with some of the compromised institutions. So for example, there's a gentleman named Juan Denzer. He's spoken on several of my panels. He's an electronic resources librarian at SUNY Binghamton. Well, now he's at SUNY Oswego. But back in 2017, SUNY Binghamton was the most compromised university. Every single day, he would get an email, Juan would get an email from me. And so this enabled him to say, okay, like, I'm tired of hearing from Sari. What can I do to stop this? And, you know, it's not really his job. He didn't have the resources. He doesn't really have he had a very small IT department. So what he did was he created a script that was able to block Sci-Hub activity and then simultaneously send me an email and letting me know what originating IP addresses were part of that actual session, which was brilliant. And as soon as he deployed that, they went from the biggest to having no compromise, any compromised activity whatsoever. And so we worked with some of the universities, the ones that I felt that were constantly being compromised, spoke with them to find out that they are on a Linux solution, not a Windows solution that Juan created. So went back to the developers at IEEE and asked them if they could come up with something, which they did. So we then worked with OCLC we have right now that they're the owners of Easy Proxy. We put that on their community webpage, so it's freely available, this script, and anybody can deploy it. As I said, there's a Windows and a Linux solution. And IEEE has also updated their stanza as well, so that enables that enables IEEE, force of habit, to understand the nature of the activity and where it's coming from. Again, that's also on OCLC's website. And that actually goes against a blacklist that we have that we know of Sci-Hub IP addresses. And we don't know all of Sci-Hub IP addresses that are in existence, but we do know a great deal of it. And so we've been also collaborating with other publishers. So as I mentioned, we have a Sci-Hub executive steering group and that was formed in 2017. That is comprised of over 15 different publishers. So we have Taylor & Francis, IEEE, Wiley, Elsevier, AMA, ASME, so even some of the smaller publishers are also involved. And within that group, we have a technical working group, a university relations working group, as well as a legal working group, because we really feel that this is a serious problem, and it's really disrupting the entire publishing research ecosystem. So an ACS, the American Chemical Society, has actually, they have a lawsuit out there against Sci-Hub, and they're able to disable some of the domain names, and they've been successful with that. So we always applaud them every single meeting that we have. But we've also formed what's called the IP intrusion database. So this idea came out of several discussions that I've had with my peers at other publishers to say that they were like, oh, they would call me up, say, Sari, I got these IP addresses from China. They're hitting our firewalls. Is this happening to you? And I don't know. Let me check. So, you know, having these constant conversations, I felt like, you know, maybe we need to have some kind of a central threat database repository so that we all can see what's happening on our system simultaneously to see if there's a bigger issue that we need to take care of. And that we partnered with a company called PSI, and they have, they've implemented that, and it's launched as of last year. So what can you do in your space regarding Sci-Hub? Well, as I mentioned, we have the stanza, but there's also this special parameter, and that's how we manage and track activity. It's highly confidential, so I didn't post it on here, but if you'd like to learn more, feel free to contact me. But that, you can do that or simultaneously implement the Windows and Linux or Linux solution script, and that also uses a parameter. So either way, it's really, both solutions are great. It's more Band-Aids on the problem. And then the blacklisted Sci-Hub IP addresses. So as I mentioned, we've been contacting customers for the last several years, and they've been so gracious in providing us with the additional data about the originating IP addresses, which mainly come from one part of the world, which I probably shouldn't say where, but you can take a wild guess. And so we've collected all that data and also done additional research, pulled in other IP addresses that we are known are pretty bad, and put them on PSI's IP registry. So, and this is all free. So if you go to ipregistry.org, you enter in your institution information. There's a little place right here on the big circle where you can download the blacklist for free and upload that to your servers. So it's pretty simple. So for the remainder of 2019, what we're doing is we're trying to partner with REN-ISAC. We've had several discussions with them about some of the efforts that we have, and we have a lot of mutual members, customers in this space, and think that they would really benefit from this blacklist. So we're looking at having future conversations along with PSI and REN-ISAC, and possibly doing a webinar for members as well. Also within our Sci-Hub University Relations Working Group, we have a security summit that we've created at Worcester Polytechnic. So that is being held in October 11th at WPI. So for those of you who are on the East Coast, feel free. It's a free session to join one day. And so we're going to have a lot of discussion, not necessarily about Sci-Hub, but about security, digital piracy, and what the surrounding universities are doing in this space. We also, as I mentioned, we participate in library conferences. We just put in a proposal for the Charleston Library Conference. That's a very largely attended conference by the academic community, mostly as you can tell, librarians. So we're hoping, we spoke there last year, and we're hoping to continue to educate those in this, on our efforts in November. So I think that's all I have for today. So thank you so much for your time. And if you have any questions, I think we're ahead of schedule by 15 minutes or so. So that's a good question. We don't see open access as a threat. We do have, I'm not exactly sure the number, but we're constantly publishing open access journals and hybrid journals. We understand that that is it's something that we need to do as a publishing community, so we are working on that. So we don't necessarily see it as a threat, but it is something new to publishing, because it is, I don't want to say it's somewhat of a threat to the business model, but it does change a little bit things of what's happening. So we are fully aware of it. We're making progress and adjustments to ensure that is available to others. I do know that there are some other sites like ResearchGate and academia.edu that are out there that, there's a little bit of controversy around those, but we are working towards having legitimate open access. And Sci-Hub actually does also steal open access content too. So it in fact, hurting authors as well. So it's not just the publishers. Anyone else? Yes, Oaks. I haven't looked at the actual disciplines, but, and since I just started at Elsevier, I haven't been able to get that data just yet. But when I was at IEEE, it was, I want to say 90% was journals and conference proceedings, and then the rest was our standards and ebooks. So they are stealing everything. But I think because the STM type content is mainly in journals, that's what they're really focusing on. We haven't seen any unpublished work being compromised, but that's only probably because we haven't been looking for it. That's not to say that, I mean, Elsevier has other preprint servers and things like that, like SSRN, so we haven't looked at those, or I think even Mendeley might even have some pre-published articles, but we don't know, we haven't explored that avenue yet, but mostly Alexandra's whole motto was to make everything behind the paywall free, so, but that's something that we're considering exploring. Anyone else? Okay, thank you so much for your time.